Martha Collins was 67 years old, barely 120 pounds, when she grabbed a badly injured Hell's Angel by his broken arm and screamed over the sound of a roaring tornado that was tearing the sky apart, telling him to move or die, even as an EF4 funnel dropped from the clouds barely 2 miles behind them. Because in that moment, she did not see criminals or fearsome bikers. She only saw human beings who were about to be killed, and without stopping to think, she began, dragging them toward the only shelter she had, an old reinforced storm cellar beneath her barn, pulling, shouting, waving her flashlight like a madwoman as 79 of the most feared outlaws in America abandoned their motorcycles and followed a gray-haired woman in a floral dress into the ground while the wind screamed like a living thing. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The sky had turned an unnatural green at exactly 4:47 p.m., the kind of color Martha knew too well, the same color that had taken her husband 22 years earlier. And when the sirens started wailing, she counted the seconds between their cries, because living alone for decades had taught her to measure everything, from money to silence to time itself. And when her phone buzzed with the emergency alert warning of an EF4 tornado in Creek County, she whispered that she knew already, though her feet stayed frozen on the porch as the wind picked up and her old farmhouse groaned behind her like it was tired of standing. That was when she saw the headlights on Route 44, dozens of them cutting through rain and debris, motorcycles being shoved sideways by the wind, riders fighting to keep control before finally pulling off the road, because there was nowhere else to go, nothing but empty land and Martha's farm sitting alone in 60 acres of nothing. And when the first biker slid in her driveway, and more followed, 10, 20, then dozens, her stomach dropped as she recognized the death head patches on their backs, and every instinct in her body told her to run and hide. But then a bike went down hard, sparks flying as a rider slammed into the asphalt, his arm bending in a way arms were never meant to bend, and behind them the tornado began to form, a dark finger reaching for the ground. Martha did not remember deciding to move. She only knew she was suddenly off the porch, running toward them, shouting that she had a cellar, that it was reinforced, that it would save their lives. And when one gray-bearded biker lifted his visor and coldly asked if she even knew who they were, she snapped back that the tornado did not care about their names or patches, and if they didn't move, they would all be dead in minutes. And after one long second of staring at her, the biker turned and ordered his men to follow her. They ran, shouldered open the stuck barn doors together, dragged the injured man between them, and poured down the cellar stairs as the wind tried to rip Martha away, until she counted every head and dove inside, just as the doors slammed shut and darkness swallowed them. The tornado hit like the world was ending, not sounding like wind, but like a screaming train tearing straight through the earth, the concrete walls groaning as dust rained down and grown men prayed, cried, or rocked in terror, while Martha lit her lantern and took charge with the calm voice of someone who had spent 35 years as an ER nurse, asking about injuries, pulling the young man with the shattered arm forward, learning his name was Derek, setting his bones while he bit down on a wallet to keep from screaming, splinting him, cleaning his head wound, and telling him he would live. She moved through the packed cellar, calming a panicking boy named Tommy by making him breathe with her, handing out water, blankets, and steady words, while the leader of the group, Vincent Iron Kane, president of the Oklahoma chapter, watched her with disbelief as she told them all that the cellar had survived storms before and would survive this one too. When the sound finally stopped and silence felt like a switch had been flipped, Martha climbed out with Iron and found her home completely erased, not damaged but gone, reduced to debris and memories, and she fell to her knees clutching a ruined photograph of her son Danny, killed in Afghanistan 20 years earlier, whispering his name as Iron caught her before she collapsed, his face changing when he saw the photo, recognition flashing through his eyes before he tried to hide it. When Martha pressed him, he admitted he needed to make some calls, that he needed time to be sure. And when she demanded answers, he only promised he would return in 5 days and tell her everything, leaving her standing in the wreckage of her life, watching 79 bikers ride away, her heart pounding with questions she could not yet understand, unaware that whatever secret her son had carried for 2 decades was about to change everything she believed she knew. For 20 years, Martha had believed her son died the way the Army told her, serving his country in a clean, honorable way, and now Iron was crouched beside her explaining that in a way it was still true, because Danny did die a hero, running toward danger instead of away from it, drawing enemy fire so his brothers could live. And when Iron repeated Duke's words about how Danny did not take cover when the shooting started, but charged forward to protect the others, Martha nodded through her tears and whispered that it sounded exactly like her boy, because Danny had always been like that, always stepping in front of trouble for others. And Iron placed a steady hand on her shoulder and told her he was sorry, that he struggled with whether to tell her at all, but she deserved the truth after living in the dark for so long. And when Martha asked if there were any suspects, anyone at all who might be responsible, Iron hesitated just long enough for her heart to start pounding before he admitted there had been a sergeant in Danny's unit named Carl Whitmore, a man Duke had always suspected because he and Danny had bad blood after some kind of falling out months before the ambush. And when Martha asked where this Whitmore was now, Iron said no one knew, that the man left the Army 6 months after Danny died and disappeared. And Martha looked up at him with a stillness that frightened even herself and told him to find that man. Because if someone killed her son, she needed to know. And Iron warned her that it could be dangerous, that if Whitmore was guilty, he would not want to be found. But Martha stood up, steadier than she felt, and said this was not about revenge, but about truth and justice, about her son and about herself. And after a long silence, Iron finally agreed to make calls, though he warned her it might lead nowhere or to answers she might not like. And as they walked back toward the construction site, Martha's mind churned with the idea that Danny had been betrayed and that the man who did it was still out there living freely, a thought that made her sick but also stirred something she had not felt in decades, a sense of purpose. The day moved on in a blur as the bikers worked, and when Martha tried to help, they gently stopped her, telling her to rest and instead talk to people. So she walked among men from places she had only heard of on maps, listening as they told her stories about Danny, how he talked one man off a bridge during a divorce, how he welcomed another when he was just a scared prospect, how he helped someone get clean by telling him he mattered. And Martha held each story close like a treasure, loving her. Son more with every word and feeling her anger grow toward the man who took him, until a furious woman arrived in a pickup truck demanding to know why hundreds of bikers were invading the countryside. And Martha recognized her neighbor Linda, who accused the men of being criminals, only to fall silent when Martha told her they were her son's brothers and that they were rebuilding her home after the tornado. And when Linda protested about reputation and danger, Martha calmly said she cared about actions, not rumors. And Iron promised Linda his men were there to help, not cause trouble. And though Linda left uneasy, Martha knew the town would keep talking. Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived, a well-dressed developer named Gerald Patterson, who spoke politely but coldly about buying Martha's land for development. And when she refused, he hinted that she was old, poor, alone, and associating with dangerous people, which brought Iron to her side, quietly making it clear that she was under their protection and that Patterson needed to leave. And though the man threatened that development would happen whether she liked it or not, he eventually backed down under the weight of so many watchful eyes, and Martha felt warmth in her chest, knowing she was not alone anymore. That night, as grills flared and laughter filled the air, Duke sat with Martha and confirmed everything Iron had told her, describing the ambush in painful detail, how Danny's vehicle was hit first, how Danny was hurt but still ran forward to draw fire, saving lives for 4 or 5 minutes before being killed instantly. And though the truth broke Martha's heart all over again, she knew it was who her son truly was. And when Duke admitted he believed Whitmore had sold them out after Danny threatened to expose him, Martha told him the case was not closed anymore. Hours later, as the fire burned low, Iron returned with news that Whitmore had changed his name to Charles Wright and was living a quiet life in Nevada, married with kids, and Martha whispered that it was not fair, that her son lay in the ground while his killer lived peacefully. And when Iron asked what she wanted to do, she said she wanted to look him in the eye and ask why, not knowing what would come after that. And Iron promised to make it safe. The next morning, Martha woke to the sound of hammers and saw walls already standing where there had been nothing the day before. And though she was amazed, her thoughts were pulled elsewhere when Iron told her he had more news, that the army had lied and covered up the ambush, that Danny was murdered by betrayal. And though the pain nearly knocked her down, Iron reminded her again that Danny still died a hero, running toward danger to save others. And Martha asked only one thing, that they find Whitmore. As the day went on, she spoke with Preacher, who told her Danny used her as his example of strength. And though the grief felt new and raw, she accepted that it was part of loving him. Then another man arrived, James Walker, Danny's former commanding officer, who confessed that he knew Whitmore was responsible but had been silenced by the army, and now wanted to help make things right. And after weighing his guilt and honesty, Martha allowed him to help, making it clear this was about Danny, not excuses. That evening, gathered around a fire with Iron, Duke, Preacher, and Walker, Martha listened as they laid out what they knew about Whitmore's new life and discussed ways to expose the truth, including bringing it to a journalist. And when Duke hinted at darker options, Martha shut it down immediately, saying she would not become what she hated, that Danny believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. And as the fire crackled and sparks rose into the night, Martha knew her path was set, not driven by revenge, but by justice. And for the first time in 20 years, she felt ready to face the truth and whatever came with it. Danny would never have wanted blood on anyone's hands, and Martha knew that deep in her bones. So when Iron nodded and said they would do it the hard way, truth, confrontation, and letting the world see what had been hidden, she felt both fear and relief twist together in her chest. And when Preacher asked when it would happen, and Iron said they would finish the house first, give it 2 more weeks, Martha surprised herself by agreeing, because after waiting in the dark for 20 years, 2 more weeks with the truth finally in reach felt bearable. And that night, she sat alone under the stars thinking about how everything was about to change, wondering if she was ready to face the man who destroyed her life, knowing she probably never would be, but also knowing she would go anyway. And later, when Preacher sat beside her and gently asked if she could sleep, and she admitted her mind would not quiet down, she asked him if he thought a man like Whitmore could ever be forgiven, and Preacher told her forgiveness required real regret, something rare in people who had built whole lives on top of their crimes. And when Martha worried that confronting Whitmore might change nothing, that he might feel nothing at all, Preacher reminded her that sometimes closure was not about changing the other person, but about finally saying what had been trapped inside her for decades. And those words gave her a fragile sense of hope that carried her through the final days of construction until the morning she stood at her driveway, staring at a finished house built by hundreds of men who now called her family. A house stronger than the one she had lost, marked with a sign honoring her as their mother. And when Iron asked if she was ready to leave, she looked once more at the porch, the barn, the life rebuilt from ruin, then turned toward the long road west and said yes. And before dawn, a small convoy rolled out, motorcycles humming through empty highways as Martha clung to Iron's back, watching familiar land fade into desert, thinking about the last time she had hugged Danny at an airport and how his goodbye now felt like a warning she had been too innocent to hear. And mile after mile, her nerves tightened until they stopped for gas. And Duke reminded her she was stronger than she felt, that the courage she saw in her son had come from her. And though she did not fully believe him, his words steadied her enough to keep going, through heat and dust, and finally into Nevada as the sun sank low. And that night, in a quiet motel, Preacher confessed the secret he had carried all these years. The evidence Danny had trusted him to protect, the fear that had kept him silent. And though Martha's anger burned hot, she saw the same guilt in his eyes that lived in her own heart, and chose to use the truth as fuel instead of letting it tear them apart. And by morning, a plan was set to confront Whitmore before he knew what was coming, to let him grow careless. And when they finally parked on a calm suburban street lined with neat houses and trimmed lawns, Martha felt the weight of 20 years pressed down on her as she walked to the door of the man who had stolen everything from her. And when he answered with a polite smile and a fake name, she spoke Danny's name aloud and watched the color drain from his face, watched the mask crack as she laid out what he had done, how greed had driven him to betrayal. And when he tried to deny it, to push her away, to hide behind time and silence, she did not raise her voice or threaten him. She simply told him the truth would not stay buried forever, that people would know who he was. And when he finally snapped and spat cruel words about her son, the hatred spilling out of him in front of his neighbors and his wife, something broke inside him, and piece by piece the truth fell out, halting and ugly, until he admitted he had given the enemy the rout, admitted he had chosen money over lives. And when he collapsed on his knees begging forgiveness, Martha did not feel victory or peace, only a deep, aching sadness at how small and empty the reason had been. And as his wife stood frozen in the doorway, realizing the man she loved was a stranger, Martha understood that justice was not loud or dramatic. It was simply the truth standing in the open after years of hiding. And though the road ahead would still be hard, though the pain would never fully leave her, She knew in that moment that Danny's story would no longer be a lie wrapped in silence, and that knowing at last was the beginning of letting herself live again. He stayed on his knees, shoulders shaking, crying in the middle of the perfect street he had built his lies on, and Martha turned her face away because she had nothing left to give him, quietly saying it was finished now. And Duke stared at her in disbelief, asking how they could just leave after everything that man had done. But Martha answered that he had already confessed, and his wife had heard it, and the neighbors had heard it too. And she looked back one last time at Whitmore, broken and small, and said that when the evidence arrived later that night, Rebecca Chun would have everything she needed to tear the truth open for the whole world to see. And when Duke asked about justice, Martha said this was justice, not the kind with courtrooms and handcuffs, but the kind where everyone knows who you really are, and you have to wake up every day and live with it. And as she walked toward the bikes, she could hear Whitmore's wife screaming behind her, demanding answers, demanding to know who she had married, while neighbors gathered with phones raised, recording everything. And Martha knew that by nightfall the videos would be everywhere, and by morning the life Whitmore had built would be gone. And as she climbed onto Iron's bike and told him it was time to go, they rode away from that quiet street and from 20 years of unanswered questions. And Martha held on as the wind dried her tears, surprised that she felt no victory at all, only an empty calm, because Danny was still gone and nothing could change that. But at least the truth would finally be known, and that night they met Tiny at a roadside motel, a huge man with gentle eyes who handed over a dirt-stained lockbox he had dug up exactly where Preacher said it would be. And Martha's hand shook as she opened it and found a single old flash drive inside. And when they plugged it into a laptop, everyone held their breath until files appeared on the screen. Documents and recordings and photos and bank. Records that told the full story. And they realized Danny had documented everything. Not just Whitmore, but others too. And Martha cried as she scrolled because she saw who her son truly was. A man who saw wrongdoing and refused to look away, who risked his life to do what was right. And when Iron said the journalist would tear the system apart with this, Martha told him to call her. And after the call, Martha stepped outside under a cold desert sky and whispered to the stars how proud she was of her son, feeling a quiet warmth inside her like a goodbye. And at dawn, Rebecca Chin arrived, sharp and focused. And after reviewing the evidence, she warned Martha that once the story broke, her life would never be the same. But Martha said it already wasn't, and watched the car disappear with the truth inside it, feeling both empty and free, like she had finally put down a weight she had carried for decades. And when Iron told her closure wasn't about feeling good, but about being finished, she understood. And days later, they rode back toward Oklahoma, taking the long way because Martha needed the road to process everything. And when they finally reached her new house at sunset, lights glowing and flowers planted out front, she stood stunned as Iron welcomed her home. And when she stepped inside, she found a place filled with people who had become her family, balloons and laughter and hugs overwhelming her. And the night turned into a celebration full of music and food and warmth. And late in the evening, Rebecca called to say the story would run in the morning and that it would be big. And Martha said she was ready. And when dawn came, she read the article on her porch, crying as she saw her son's name cleared and his courage honored. And by noon, the world was talking. And when a senator came to her house promising a full investigation and criminal charges, Martha felt the strange shock of real justice finally arriving. And weeks later, Whitmore was arrested and the cover up unraveled. But Martha felt no joy, only relief. And when Iron told her the club wanted to honor her with a patch never given before, she accepted through tears. And that night, hundreds of bikers gathered on her land as Iron spoke about Danny and the promise they had failed to keep, and about the woman who had run toward danger instead of away from it. And when the patch was pinned over her heart and the crowd roared, Martha felt surrounded by family. And later she knelt by her son's memorial stone and told him everything about the truth, the justice, the home, the people who loved her now, and she promised him she would be okay. And as the sun rose, Iron stood beside her and asked what came next. And Martha said she wanted to help others the way she had been helped. And as the bike slowly rolled away and silence returned, she sat on her porch with coffee and read a letter Iron had left her, welcoming her home at last. And for the first time in 20 years, Martha Collins felt she was exactly where she was meant to be, no longer lost, no longer alone, standing in the light with her son's story finally told and her heart finally at peace. If you like this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep bringing you powerful stories like this. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and let us know which part of the story hit you the hardest. Your support means more than you know.